afternoon, and I'm delighted to be invited to the conference, the first international virtual sports medicine and sports science conference in sunny Malaysia. Hopefully we'll be able to meet together next year. If we would have been in Malaysia today, we'd obviously have had a great night out last night. We will be discussing sports science and what a bad year we've had. But we'd also be looking forward, and we'd be optimistic about the years ahead and the things we've learned from the current climate. It has been challenging. I don't want to go too much into COVID-related factors, but obviously that is a theme of the conference. But what I want to do is try to stick to the things I know and the things that I'm passionate about, talking about Paralympic athletes, coaching, physiology related to elite performance. And the title of my presentation today is Passing the Baton to Tokyo, where I hope to be in September next year, working as a coach and scientist with Paralympians. So my name's Dr. Gary Brickley. I'm from the University of Brighton, and I hope you enjoy my talk today. Thank you to the committee for inviting me, and I just want to tell you a little bit about my journey, and hopefully we'll have a good Q&A session when that comes up near to conference time. I was at 17, I joined the Royal Navy, travelled the world, became a chief petty officer. I was in charge of a missile system, Seawolf missile system, as an electronics engineer. But then at 26, I decided to start sports science, and I went to the University of Brighton. It had a good reputation, and got involved early on in sport and exercise science, and became passionate about working with athletes at a high level. And we had some good Olympic athletes coming into our labs during that period. So my learning curve was steep, going from a technician to a sports scientist, but I've always had a passion of sport, having played water polo to a high level and been an open water swimmer. I carried on and did a PhD, and I did the PhD at the University of Brighton and did the final year in Australia at the University of Queensland, in Queensland University of Technology, where I looked at the metabolic responses to high intensity exercise and continuous exercise using something called the critical power concept, which I still use in lots of the work I do with athletes and in some of the teaching that I do at the university. I was appointed as physiologist to the Great Britain cycling team, working with the mountain bike, track, road team in 1999-2000, when lottery money just started to pour in, and so it was an exciting time. I was the only sports scientist working on the programme, which has dramatically changed in the last 20 years, where there's a number of individuals looking at nutrition, psychology, performance analysis, but I was early involved in that, and it gave me a brilliant experience. I started working with the Paralympic team in 2000, and the picture down the bottom shows us heading off with one of the athletes in 2000. And this athlete here, David Stone, I'll talk about later on, is an athlete I still work with 20 years on. Whilst I was in Australia, I collapsed, and I had a problem that I thought was a problem with my heart, and hence the picture of the heart. So I carried out a lot of checks on my heart, but thought, actually, I don't really know enough about cardiology. So I went and did a master's in cardiology, and I do lots of research related to heart failure and exercise from a cardiac perspective. So I've got a good background in muscle physiology, cardiac responses to exercise, and work with Paralympic athletes. I'm into my open swimmer. open water swimming. Here I'm swimming the Rottnest Channel in Australia, which is a great swim from Perth to Rottnest Island. I've done long swimming the length of Lake Zurich. I've swum the Channel, the English Channel, which is always a good feat to do that and be the fastest for my age is something I'm quite proud of. And people are still swimming across the Channel. Some people are trying to get across to migrate, going from France to the UK. But there's also people swimming the Channel up until the end of September in the UK as a challenge, and it's a challenge that takes about what took me just less than 12 hours. But preparation for that is important, and getting that right from a nutrition point of view, training point of view, is something I've prepared for a number of years. So the talk today is about Paralympic sport, and the focus will be around the Tokyo Games. We know at the moment the Tokyo Games have shifted to August and September of 2021, and they will take a different perspective than what they perhaps were originally intended to do. Whether the crowds will be huge, we don't know. Whether the dates are going to be changed, we still don't know. And we've all been affected in some ways by the pandemic, and hopefully some of you have managed to learn quite a lot about it, and you can learn quite a lot about lung function, inflammation, and the possible consequences on the heart and the muscles from some of the long COVID issues that are coming out. But even research is coming out all of the time and will continue to come out in this area. I'm no expert on the research here, so watching things online from the Royal Society of Medicine and trying to access some of these top presentations by people such as Sanjay Sharma have been something that I've looked out for during the period where I've been forced to stay inside, but I've learned a lot from the top people in the field. And I don't want to dwell too much on the COVID side of things, because I want to focus on my experiences in Paralympic sport, but also some of the challenges that have arisen during this period. So I'm fortunate enough to have been involved in 6 Paralympic Games, and I'm proud of being involved in those games and coaching people to gold medals and watching the success of our athletes over the years. In 2000, we had not achieved any gold medals from the Paralympic cycling, but come Athens 2004, where the challenges of dry heat were considered, the athletes that I started to work with certainly started to win gold medals and multiple gold medals, and gradually this medal factory was running out gold medals at every single games. And with the success of this, we had added funding, which gave more support to our athletes through the lottery funding, and gave more opportunities for coaches and scientists like myself. And if I think back to 2000, where there's fairly limited research in Paralympic sport, to now, where there is a constant stream of top quality research coming out, it has certainly moved on well over the years. The peak of my own experience in Paralympic sport was at Beijing, where we got 17 gold medals in paracycling, and this is a team that in 2000 got 0 gold medals. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in at least 9 of those gold medals, coaching athletes. And I became experienced in coaching athletes with multiple medal targets. So what we have there is individuals that are doing a heat, doing a final, then getting ready for the next event, recovering for one day, getting back on, doing another event, recovering for another day and getting back on it for the next event. So continually trying to operate at a high level of performance, recover and be successful in the next event has been a constant challenge for me in getting the athletes prepared for the games and working out the best way to potentially conserve certain performances, but also to optimize performances and set certain markers as a physiologist and coach. So Beijing are very hot games, 35 to 40 degrees at times, preparation of exercising in the heat. London was quite sunny and very successful home games, so less travelling in preparation compared to something like Rio, where the athletes would need to prepare again for exercising in the heat under slightly different conditions to Beijing from the local population. And with Tokyo, again, our challenges, and the two presenters before me, Ashley and Carl, sorry, not Ashley and Carl, Ash and Ollie have presented very effectively on the heat requirements going into something like Tokyo 2020. And we have a heat strategy that we've produced through the English Institute of Sport, using some of the great research that we've done from our labs to prepare our athletes optimally for the Tokyo Games. So looking forward, and at this point in November, I would have returned from a very successful games held out on the racetrack in Fuji, and we would have been successful in para-triathlon, para-swimming, cycling. Those are the key areas that I'm keen and interested in the areas where I work in. So as I mentioned, I started working with British Cycling in 2000 as a fairly small unit with a performance director. I was lucky enough to be appointed in the position as physiologist whilst I was completing my PhD and gained some great experience. But now what we have is a strong science and medicine support team, and we can see throughout the world this support team is dependent on finances, it's dependent on equipment, it's dependent on facilities, and certain sports will get a very good level of support and they will continue to flourish, and other sports may be neglected because perhaps at the time there's not a strong performer. The model in the UK is about giving rewarding success and evaluating and re-evaluating different sports to see if we can improve in certain areas. But sports that we may not be successful in, investment is very poor, which is a shame for people that might be brilliant performers in those particular sports. But in a world-class performance team, the athlete is at the centre, the coach supports the athlete, and the support team around that support the coach and the athlete, and we work towards chipping away to get the best possible athlete that is healthy physically and mentally, and that has the best way of improving their performance through the number of aspects you see on there: the nutrition, the psychology, the biomechanics, and the medical services. But ultimately, the athlete has got to want to do it, and the athlete has got to be physically capable of performing their best on the day in the environment that they're working in. I'm fortunate enough to have worked with a number of top Olympic gold medalists as a physiologist going back over the years, but my passion is more about working with the Paralympians that you probably know less about. Sarah's story there at the top I'll talk about, who was born with one hand. David Stone, a cerebral palsy athlete, born with born with cerebral palsy, Darren Kenny down at the bottom there, who had 3 brain injuries, which moved him into the cerebral palsy category. Amputees, Rachel and Simon, who have had road traffic accidents and various issues where they've needed to have amputations or diminished performance. So in Paralympic sport, we work in cycling certainly with those with visual impairments and those with cerebral palsy or muscular dysfunction or neuromuscular dysfunction, and spinal cord injured people and people with amputations. And what you can see from this model is that there are lots of issues that can be alleviated with different interventions that are related to the heat responses. And this slide is taken from Ben Stevenson's PhD, where we're looking at ways of enhancing performance, whether that is through pre-cooling or through training or through adapting the diet. These would be some of the factors that we will look at to try to ultimately offset some of the things that may be affecting a negative performance, but to ultimately improve the athlete's health and their performance when it comes to training and when it comes to a major competition. So just have a quick look at that aspect, things we can monitor, things we can track, and things perhaps we can intervene on. So I'm a physiologist. I'm also a coach. I coach swimming, I coach cycling, I coach runners, and I talk about the athlete being at the centre. And if you look at the slide here, you don't have to read the words, but we know when perhaps we've been a young athlete and you've got someone trying to throw things at you, often you just want to run, you want to swim, you want to train, you want to be with your mates, and you want to perform as best as you possibly can. You don't want too much information, whether that information is biochemical, whether it's neural. Those are the things we perhaps don't want. And we also have to pitch as a coach and scientist to the right level for that athlete. So some athletes are incredibly intelligent and want more and more information. Some athletes want the coach and scientist to do all the analysis and just get out there and run. And we have to be really careful on how we operate and how we work with our athletes and work with our coaches. And equally, the scientist working with a coach who is skeptical of sport and exercise science, we really have to work on the best ways of getting that person on board and trying to find out what they want from the support services. And that's not something you can teach at university level. That's something that comes with experience, and it comes with working with people and adapting and continually thinking on your feet. Because the circumstances might change, so the athlete might want loads and loads of information in training, but wants the bare minimum when it comes to racing. So bear that in mind, those of you who are scientists, bear that in mind, coaches, and also when you're an athlete, still think about the beauty of the sport and the aesthetics of the sport, as opposed to numbers, whistles, stopwatches, etc. So in our physiology support systems, we combine lab, field testing along with continual education. In our developing athletes, perhaps we need more education, and in some of our early stages, we might be doing more laboratory testing to physiological profile an athlete, but later on, we may move towards more field testing to make sure the dynamics of exercising, balancing on a bike, turning corners, sprinting, recovering are developed a lot better. In the current situation, what we have is a limit to our laboratory testing where we can't push our athletes to maximum. So we're doing submaximal work. We are extrapolating to try to consider where maximal performance may lie. We're able to do a bit more testing in the field because we're outside, and we potentially may be less susceptible to lung infections through particles in the air. So we're having to adapt, and we're having to think about how we can work with our athletes and how we can protect the athlete and the other people that work around the individual. We're constantly educating on the immune function, on heat, and on performance related to the sport that we're going in for. Tactics may be essential in certain areas. But ultimately, as a physiologist, we're trying to develop the performer and develop the athlete as a good, rounded person. Now, as a coach, and hopefully there's some coaches in the audience that can relate to this, coaching isn't just about doing a coaching course and then turning up and pressing a stopwatch or writing a few mental notes. You need many skills, and certainly in my coaching roles, I found myself doubling up in some of these areas. I'm not a cardiologist, but I've had to take people when they've collapsed to the cardiac department. I'm able to translate if we're stuck in Prague in the Czech Republic and an athlete has collapsed. I'm able to read the ECGs. I'm able to converse with the specialists, and some of those skills are quite useful. We have press conferences after winning gold medals, and we need to deal with journalists that might be trying to chase a story that might be scandalous, such as the current issues related to medical interventions in sport. So we need to be able to think about how we're going to protect the athlete and support the athlete. I find myself cooking, shopping, counselling, fixing people's computers, going to venues and checking out that there's good facilities for the hotels, good facilities for socialising, having a coffee, and making sure people aren't escaping a training camp and going out and to the wrong places. I need to be up on altitude and different interventions such as exercising in the heat. So we need a good rounded performance, and if you're applying for a coaching role, you should not just consider your level 1, 2 and 3 courses. You should be thinking, I've got a little bit more here, and this is some experience that I've gained over the years, or areas that I need to work on to improve my ability to coach the athlete. So do think about those. Think about those when you're working with athletes that might be coming into might be considering coaching roles, and also think about it when you're educating different coaches. And coaches will have their own approaches in that they may be very strong on the biomechanics, they may be very excellent on motivational techniques from the psychological aspects. They might be a good shoulder to cry on, or they might be very, very good at just setting training programs. And we all know we have strengths and weaknesses which we can enhance. I'm lucky enough to be involved in a number of different projects, and I just want to move into some of the science related to the project. We've teamed up with a group in Brazil around the Rio Games, and also I'll go out to Tokyo before the Games next year now and work with different groups out there that might be needing a little bit more more support or experience. So my whole journey in Paralympics, Olympics has been one of mixing with different populations, learning from others, going out to venues 2 years, 3 years before, and trying to get the best for the athletes, but also give something back to sport and exercise science. We did a great project supported by the Newton Fund where we were able to get Brazilian athletes working on a treadmill, profiling them where they had absolutely no support before, and finding out what their critical power is, working out some of their training zones, translating some of the science into performance data that they can use once they return to their home areas, has been a really fun experience, but also an experience hopefully that the athletes have gained from. I want to talk a little bit about some of the athletes that I work with and related to the build-up to Tokyo. And the athlete in the front there, Joe Townsend, is a double amputee who was involved in improvised explosive device that went off in Afghanistan as a 19-year-old Royal Marine. I'm lucky enough to know Joe very well. He lives locally, so I can work with him quite closely, and I swim with him, go paddleboarding with him, and work with him in my laboratories in the University of Brighton, and go to his home to help him with some of the work that he does. He's a para-triathlete. The event, if you're unaware, is 750 swim, 20k cycle, and a 5k for him, wheelchair race, and obviously with some of the sports, the athletes are quite different in their functional ability. So here Joe might be against people that have single leg amputations, people with legs that have got spinal cord limitations, and ultimately it's never going to be fair. There's going to be people at the top end of their functional limitations and people that are largely impaired but just need to get a race. And in para-triathlon there is a small element of factoring, but there's two separate classifications for Joe's wheelchair triathlon group. So this is someone who didn't do triathlon before but got into triathlon. He's very strong. If you can see here where he's won the Commonwealth Games out in the Gold Coast in 2018. Here you can see him on his own trainer. So working flat out, he's got his home gym there, getting out on the road in wheelchair sports, finding smooth areas, dealing with cars, dealing with traffic is very, very difficult. So much of the work may be replicated in the lab or in the field. We've set this up on our treadmill before, and obviously he will, as a hand cyclist, do lots of turbo training in altitude, in the heat, in our labs, but also in his own gym. We have many challenges that are needed when we're working in Paralympic sport, and Joe, as a double amputee, needs to adapt and modify his equipment. So here he's made a plaster of Paris mould out of his own stump, and he's developed some carbon fibre inserts that will enable him to maximise the forces that he's producing on the cranks and make sure he's got a really good purchase on his stumps whilst he's hand cycling. So there's some great challenges here from technical side of things, where we can try to optimize airflow, we can try to optimize factors related to the heat, and also try to ensure that it can produce the most power in the most effective way, and is able to pace himself effectively in the sports that he's doing. Here's some of the work from last week at the pool, where he's just come back into his training after a period of illness, constantly adapting the stroke, and thinking about what we can do in training, working with hand paddles, working technically with certain filming, but there's always things that can be improved. Certainly working in the pool alongside Joe is good for me. I can get a good view, as opposed to swimming alongside him in the murky waters of the English Channel, where I can't perhaps see so much what's going on under the water. But we are constantly developing things. Here with Joe in the pool, he gets quite a lot of muscle damage from the turns. Can't tumble turn, he's pushing off with his hands. Technically, it's quite draining thinking about stroke. That does start to improve over the years, but there's always constant challenges in trying to enhance performance and adapt and modify to the field that we're working in. What you can see here is a very large upper body of Joe Townsend here. He's got wheelchair gloves there that are quite solid material, and we've worked on ways of adapting the gloves, and we've recently presented that again an online conference in Tokyo a couple of months ago, which we would have gone out and presented at, where we've got some new 3D printed gloves. But just if you just pause and look at the size and development of the shoulders here, Joe does a lot of weights. You could argue that weights may not be too beneficial for swimming, but having that strength on the cycle aspect and the wheelchair aspect, the run aspect of triathlon, are reasons why he's developed his shoulder strength. If we get some injuries, we need the strength will potentially protect the injuries, and would enable him to push on through different periods of training, whether that's a hypertrophy phase or a maintenance phase or an endurance phase. As I mentioned, we published this work in proceedings, where we've gone to the engineering department at the university, and we've adapted his original gloves, which were quite heavy and made out of a variation of plaster of Paris, to very lightweight bespoke gloves that give a good feel. They're very, very effective in producing power at the rim, and have started to be a great asset. So working and collaborating with different departments, it's been really useful as working as a coach and a scientist within our department. So that's just a little bit on Joe Townsend. We went on training camps out to Lanzarote over the winter. He was very focused in building his endurance up, and then come March, he had to fly quickly back to the UK, and that big bulk of endurance training wasn't necessarily lost, but that was all part of the preparation for Tokyo, the base preparation, which we'll now have to consider whether we can repeat that for this year in the same way, or given the periods of isolation, we may have to adapt to different approaches of where and how we can train. Lanzarote as a training base has very great smooth roads, good sea, clear sea. It's warm in the winter as opposed to being very cold as we move towards the winter in the UK. Joe's been a bit sick over the period, whether that's COVID related or not, has not been able to be ascertained, but we have to think of the athlete's health and think how we're going to adapt going into the next game. So there's constant challenges. We'll be able to refine our equipment a bit more, spend a bit more time on heat preparation, and hopefully there will be some good athletes coming through that need that extra year, but there'll also be athletes that will be fading that would have been peaking for the 2020 games. I want to talk a little bit now about my work in cycling, and in cycling I've been involved since 2000. Most of that work has been on the track and on the road, and it's about breaking world records. During my time, I've broken a number of world records, and we're finding different ways to chip away to break current world records. From a science perspective, we've done this with different approaches. We're able to look at torque production in one of our athletes. You can see big discrepancies between one limb and the other, which are more pronounced at different speeds, and we've published this work, case study work, which unfortunately isn't published enough in Paralympic sports. Some people don't want to give too much evidence away. Some people struggle to get that published due to the editors not allowing it to happen. But for me, trying to tease out some things from case studies that may then be applied to your athlete are good ways to go. And good ways to learn. So here we're using an SRM ergometer. We're able to measure every single pedal revolution, and we can look at it at different powers, at different cadences, and then try to think, can we even this out, or can we just make the most of what we've got and try to cut back on our losses? We can track our graphs, and here, if this graph is a bit blurry as we reach the end of the day, the green is the power that's dropping off. You've got a peak on the track here. This is a performance of 4 laps of the track. So it will vary the power as we go around the corners. You can see the blue line in the middle, gradually where cadence is dropping off. It finishes at 100 revolutions per minute, and it takes time to get up to peak cadence in a fixed gear. So this information is really useful if we're working with our para-athletes, which might have a slightly different profile to an elite athlete such as Chris Hoy. And these the cadence in particular is regulated by the gearing. So we will play around with different gearing. We'll play around so we can finish strongly, but we can also overcome the initial inertia. So we need to think about getting that gearing right, and then potentially adapting the resistance training or adapting the cadence training to enhance performance. If you look at the back end of that graph, the last bit where we've got a power of 314 watts in the last 10 seconds here, that is normally quite highly related to the person's aerobic performance. Although it's only a minute 10 long performance, by working at certain periods on enhancing the aerobic power, it will enable the athlete to really improve their 1K performance. And I think in previous years, and certainly before 2000, where in the kilometre it was considered to be highly anaerobic, we do now realise there is a strong aerobic component which will enable the athlete to perform and finish well, but also to recover well in the training that might be more high intensity related. So we're constantly adapting, using different equipment to improve performance on the track and on the field. And we can get caught up in a lot of this data, but we can also really help our athletes working alongside biomechanists, performance analysis people, and the physiology team. If we get the group of people together that really understand this, we can really be efficient in coaching and efficient in training. And we can do more clinical. So here's some scans we did from a project before 2012, where we've got the same athlete, Darren Canny, who has a weakness on one side of his body, and we're trying to look at the muscle mass to see if there is big areas of atrophy. And we were quite surprised on this, that when we took both a cross-section and a frontal view of Darren's muscle here and his bone structure, that there wasn't so great differences in the muscle mass, but the recruitment patterns are affected, and we can't measure that in such a scan. We can measure it with potentially with some EMG data, and we could certainly measure it using torque analysis. There's different approaches that we can adapt to individuals with the work we do in the labs and the work we do with our partners. From an applied approach, we have good training camps going into major games. We go out to Norway in the summer. There's still snow on the mountains there. We do a big overload, and we've done this a couple of times going into major games. A big overload 2 weeks before we fly out to the major games. So we got a little bit of recovery, but the person has really been pushed in a different environment that is quite different to being in the Olympic or Paralympic village. We go out to Australia when we're preparing to go to Beijing. We go to the south of France when we're preparing to go to Athens. And we mix it up. So there's some fun stuff, there's some challenging stuff. But the athlete ultimately is always hungry for further success. We have been to a number of different games where we've shared success. So Rio had its challenges, and this is possibly the first games where an athlete unfortunately died on the road race in Rio. So things don't always go right, things aren't always successful, and we have to learn to deal with success and failure and work on ways in which we can come back into the sport and perform better next time. Rio was the first time where para-triathlon was performed, and again many problems with exercising in the heat, dealing with crowds, and I do wonder what will happen in the Tokyo Games, how the crowds will work and how they will or won't motivate the local performers. But para-triathlon here, you can see you've got handlers here getting people out of the sea, and you have to have a bit of trust in those handlers. Just to finish, I know I'm not to finish, but just to get towards the end of the presentation, and hopefully I'm running reasonably well to time and you're still with me. I just want to talk about a few different coaching strategies with the athletes that I've worked, and talk about specific athletes and some of the issues related to optimizing their performance. So David Stone, cerebral palsy athlete, rides a tricycle, 2 gold medals in Beijing, aiming for gold medal in Tokyo, got a gold medal, 1 gold medal in London, got a bronze and a silver in Rio. So athletes stick with the program for a long time. There's obviously going to be some highs and lows, and our challenge here with David is to try and bring him back with 2 gold medals. If we can work on keeping him training over the next year, he will be very close to achieving that. We have to look at his competitors, but ultimately we can only affect what David does, and we can do that through good, strong training principles, good issues related to diet. As a cerebral palsy athlete, David burns excessive calories, so trying to make sure he doesn't go too lean is a challenge that we have. making sure he is strong, that his breathing is good, is going to be one of the issues going into Tokyo. Certainly off the back of the pandemic, we don't want David getting any lung dysfunction in lungs that are already slightly limited. What we have done though, and some people may have considered not pushing cerebral palsy athletes to their extremes. Some people said because they may be drooling at the mouth or breathing quite hard, this can be a problem. And David here, we exercised going in the build up to London in the altitude chamber, and this was very effective in that he could do his altitude work and then move up to London to perform and win a gold medal, and it worked very effectively. Darren Kenny, as I say, 3 injuries. He broke his neck when he was an elite rider, a young elite rider in the Tour of Ireland. He then tripped over a cat and damaged his brain, and he went through a windscreen and damaged his brain again. So 3 brain injuries, which means Darren had limited function, but we went into Beijing aiming for 5 gold medals, got 4 gold medals. Big issues there, 5 races at least, but also 2 rounds in the pursuit, and 3 of those races on the track in the team sprint. So we're looking at the whole range of energetics, from doing 3 laps of the track to doing 4 laps of the track to doing 12 laps of the track. So anything from 20 seconds going up to 3 minutes 36 on the 3K pursuit, going up to just over an hour as he crosses the line on the road race here. So big things that we have to consider when we're looking at Darren's physiology. And we track that. We've tracked it in the lab. I've tracked him over the years, and I've seen dips and highs in his performance, and we've tracked his power output effectively as well. The next person I want to look at is Dame Sarah Story. Now, I've worked with Sarah since 2004, and in London, you can see there from the stamps there, she was able to get 4 gold medals and 3 gold medals in Beijing. She has, you can see, a small hand. This you might think shouldn't affect her cycling performance, but it will when she's starting, when she's turning, when she's on the track. But once she's up to speed and doing something like a time trial, she is an awesome athlete. She has a max minute power of 400 watts when she's on top form. She competed at the Commonwealth Games, and she was good enough, certainly for the Olympic team, in my opinion, based on her performances on the track and the knowledge of the training that she does. And she is the most decorated Paralympian, and has continued to go, having had 2 children on the way, and that's been something that we've had to learn together, how we deal with birth. Also, Sarah breastfeeds for a long period, which seems to be very beneficial for her and for her child. And yeah, she's a very process-orientated athlete, but with some good outcomes and some good tweets from the royal family, being proud of her and giving her a damehood off the back of her performances in London. So a great athlete to work with. Again, working in short events from 30 seconds, which we don't focus on too much, 1 lap of the track, to longer events that may be up to an hour. But she's also got her own professional road team. Now, Rachel challenges for Rachel, who was with us in the 2008 games, were all about the heat and struggling in the heat. You can see on a handbike, you've got poor ventilation, you've got a camelback set up for fluid, which the athlete often won't take advantage of. And for Rachel, she has a lot of phantom pain and she'll go into spasm when overheating. So to prepare for the Beijing games, we had to overheat her a lot and put her through a lot of stress to ensure that she was ready, prepared for the Beijing games. And that's what she did, and that worked quite effectively. For some people, that might not work so well, and it may have a negative effect on their training over the next days once they've been exposed to excessive heat. So my journey in Paralympic sport has been one of great success. It doesn't always go right. This is a visually impaired athlete, Anthony Caps, with Barney Story on the front in the build-up to the Beijing Games, where they're going for a fast effort on the track. They're up to speed now, 60 kilometers an hour. Tire blows. And they're out on the track. And this is a week before we're flying away. Anthony has fractured his clavicle, and as a person, a visually impaired person on the back, you don't know what's going to happen. You've got to have faith in the team around you to land that effectively. But you can see the wheel is disintegrated, and luckily the athletes were patched up. They won 2 gold medals, but things can go wrong when you've gone through 3 or 4 years of training right at the last minute, and they will go wrong for some people. Again, we've had athletes here, Darren cerebral palsy, and you think he's going up a hard hill. You think he potentially might be having a stroke, but he's just pushed himself excessively. He's able to override a lot of the signals that are saying, no, you've got to stop here. And we've seen him collapse on a number of times, and we have to be cautious of that and know when to pull him over in training and in performance on the track and on the road. So yeah, things do go wrong. Wheels disintegrate. People have many challenges to get over. But we get there, and we keep striving to improve. We keep striving to alter training, improve on technology, and to enhance performance. And there will be many challenges. There will be challenges with timing. It will be challenges with living conditions, heat, that we will try to overcome. And we will do that by preparing our athletes the best they can, but also always expect the unexpected and be prepared for things that you may not think are going to happen. That you might be racing on a different day, that something might go wrong with the food, something might go wrong with the preparation in the hotel, and we have to be ready and adaptable to perform on the day. Nothing's going to be perfect, and we do the best we can on the day, and ultimately there's going to be different challenges when we come to Paris, and the climate, we just don't know what that's going to be like. I want to thank you for your attention today. There will be some time for some questions. I hope you've enjoyed and gained something from my journey and experiences in working in Paralympic sport over a number of years, moving towards the Tokyo Games. And I will be delighted to hear from any of you via email or at the Q&A session that follows. Thank you very much.